let's sort of start. Let's start top line then. Like I've had a look at the resume, and we've had conversations before, and we're going to get further into the detail of this. But give us an overview of what a performance coach actually does.
I mean, sometimes I get asked about that, and I'm kind of like, well, I've had over the decade of complaining at athletes. Really, that's kind of where it starts, really, because I think I've been involved, at a low level in the sport, but all my life really, and being around and done fight camps with people and cornered and just being around. You realise that over time, there's some mad stuff going on. I think that's as simple as I could say it, really. And being a performance coaches, and I guess it's the same as when I was a head of a big corporate business. I had loads of people work, thousands of people working for me. Performance is about getting the best out of an individual and perhaps trying to influence them to do things better, whatever that performance may be. When they get out of bed in the morning, they know they've got some structure and there's things they should do to be better at what they do. So I've always been involved in sport and coaching, football, motocross, race quad bikes, and then, the kickboxing to boxing. I've always been around a team or people or performance and then the business. So performance coach, I guess I say that because when I first started doing it, there was a negative approach to, you can't be a strength and conditioning coach and a nutritionist.
Right.
Well, you clearly can, because actually I find it's part and parcel of the conversations I have with the athletes, which is, if you're coming to me to do your strength and conditioning, I want to know how you're at, and I want to know how you're going to refuel, and and we can go and have a look at body composition and things. And actually it worked really well because I get to know the athletes and have better discussions really about performance. So that's where performance comes from. I'm a qualified strength and conditioning coach. I'm qualified within sports nutrition, but I feel a lot of the conversations we have is generally about behaviour, consistency, adherence, the load that these athletes are under, not just physically, but mental load is load. So performance to me is getting to know the athletes. We do something very basic called readiness scoring. I want to know how they've slept, what their mood's like, any information, I want to know how they're going to perform that day, and whether they're with me or they're doing a remote program, they've got to score that. And if they score under a 3, we're having a conversation as to why you're lacking sleep, or why your mood's down, or why your energy's down. And there's normally something we can pick out. So generally, I guess it comes down to performance comes in many things, right? And everybody's different. You've got athletes that live at home with their parents and get looked after completely and have got a good life, right? And then they can live in the gym. Then you've got athletes who've got really hard jobs and tough jobs and families and kids. And that's a different type of performance to speak to them and support them. Because the strategies that you give them they have to be able to maintain it around their life. If you overload them, and it's not that I'm critical, because I work with one of the best sports scientists there is in the game, and Dr. Carl Evans. He's my partner in Vortex, but I am critical sometimes that we overscience things, and we overscience things where we really fill people's heads with stuff that perhaps they don't understand, and actually can add to stress of all the things they need to do in the fight camp. Or out of camp, to be fair, and I'm trying to bring that back into how can I fit this into your life, dependent on, what your life is. Not everybody can be a full-time athlete. Some of them got jobs, John, haven't they? They've got they've got financial pressures, and some of them jobs are actually arduous. They're building site manual, intense jobs that actually then you've got to fuel them differently to those who maybe sat in an office, to those who are full-time. So, yeah, performance is just generally trying to understand an individual and say, how do I get the best out of you physically and mentally to perform, number one, but be safe as well, and not affect your health in the future.
I love that. I love the holistic approach, right? And I'm very lucky. I've got a cousin who's a physiotherapist, and I got to learn about how they worked with regards diagnosis and things of that nature. And I'm going to pull apart probably the worst of certain disciplines, but I remember seeing like an osteopath who said, "What's the problem?" "Oh, I know that problem," and click, 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 or, go in this position and off you go. Whereas a physiotherapist, or certainly my cousin and the physiotherapist we have with our team here in Watford, he was sitting there, okay, so what were you doing? Where do you live? You live on a big hill. Maybe that's why your calves are strained. What sort of load are you carrying when you're going on that hill? How many times a week? So I think that we get lost in a lot of this through our lives, and we almost all need a program manager, a project manager to kind of oversee the macro, as well as then, you know, sorting out the micro. But it's really positive to hear that. But can I then, we're going to get straight into it then, because I feel like the segue is pretty relevant. How difficult is it to be a program manager in, let's keep it within MMA, because it sits on UFC Fight Pass. I think people will resonate with it a bit more. And maybe we're going to have to sort of pick apart what we know about athletes, etc. But also the state of the industry. So how difficult is it to even take a holistic approach when you've got technical training, nutrition, strength, conditioning, and life? It sounds like a lot. It's a big old job.
It is a lot, and with all that comes stress load. And we always talk about training load, and I always try and tell people that training load isn't just physical, training load is mental. And there's things that will affect their training outside of actually training in MMA, you know. So they're all things to consider, but ultimately for me, I think when I started out on this journey, and the interesting thing is, John, if you look at my socials, I sell nothing. There's nothing for sale, there's no links to book me. I didn't set out on that journey. I set out on the journey to try and improve some of the athletes I worked with, some of the athletes that fought on my show at the time when I was running Shinobi and Cage Warriors Academies. I was trying to influence them, but over time, I clearly was making a difference, and it kind of exploded from there. But ultimately, it was about, I was trying to teach people less is more. And know when to rest and take some time out mentally as well as physically, right? So I think you live in this fight or flight world as a combat athlete. You've got to walk in the gym every day and spar. It's fight or flight, you know. They put themselves under pressure, certainly when fights are announced. Everybody's different. But ultimately for me, I was trying to teach people that one is from a strength and conditioning perspective, if I go back over a couple of decades, I guess, but certainly over the last decade, everybody wanted to kill themselves, murder themselves. It was like, if you're not doing a mad circuit where you're virtually throwing up every time you're taking a rest, that was called strength and conditioning. And my simple outlook on that is that's stupid, right? Because you're generally in a energy deficit because you're trying to lose weight. There's all this madness around carbohydrates are bad for you, and that has a dramatic effect on overtraining syndrome. Overtraining syndrome isn't always overtraining; it's lack of carbohydrate. But I was trying to, say, like, you need some structure. So start trying to score how hard your technical training is, and then working with coaches. And I have a great relationship with the coaches of the athletes I work with, because I won't work with an athlete if I don't get buy-in from the coach and we have a good relationship, because I think it doesn't work. But almost for them to almost periodise the training intensity as well as then what's the best days for them to do the strength and conditioning. So it was always about manageable load. Of course, never detrain the athlete. They've got to train intensive. But then it was using the strategies of carbohydrate periodisation, i.e. we feed them more on their hard days. So if you think about it from a simple principle, they have more fuel when they train hard, and they don't have as much fuel when they're not. So that was, without getting into all of the science around that, if that felt basic fundamentals to me, you know, it was like working in the football environment, which is on game day, they're going to eat differently, you know, on the recovery day, they'd eat differently. It's the same kind of principle, really. So basically I was trying to tell them, look, you need to do strength work, not mad circuit work and be dying every day and overtrained. And with that comes lack of sleep and pain and injuries and all the things that come from it, from poor nutrition as well. So I was just trying to teach some structure, really. Let's have a look at your technical training. What's the best day to slot in your strength? So conditioning, strength and conditioning, a lot of the conditioning comes from, you'll know yourself, John, of being on the mat, sparring, training. Yeah. So the main part of your conditioning, of course we put conditioning modalities in place, but generally it's about strength and power. So you know, you come in, you're lifting, you'll rest. Now, you'll be amazed the athletes I've worked with and some high level people that just couldn't understand the concept of rest. Yeah.
I fully appreciate that.
Yeah. They rush from one exercise to the next, you know, with this kind of stuff. I'm like, no, chill out. Couple of 2 to 3 minutes rest. And they're like, they can't understand it. And it's almost, if they feel they're not pushing themselves into that 9/10 out of 10, there's panic in place. And all what happened over time, and I guess and why I work with so many athletes now, is that they started to report, and the coaches did, that less injuries, less stress, better sleep, performance has gone up, because generally we have a really good win record of the squad we work with. But performance improved because by the time they got in ready to fight, they felt they were peaking. They didn't have horrendous weight cuts. They weren't dying on the scales. They went in feeling physically better. There's a tiny percentage of our athletes carry injuries, if I'm honest. And if we do, we're kind of sorting it as we go, because we work with, again, talk about a team, we work with good physiotherapists, as well. So we'll make sure we link in and get some recommendations and maybe tweak programs and whatever it may be. But it was always the same thing, which is you're in one of the hardest sports in the world. You need to know when to rest. And when I say rest, the big thing we promote now, like, go and play a game of paddle or go and have a game of five-a-side, play a game of tennis, go and do something different sometimes. You're not thinking about trying to spar, roll, be technical, and all that kind of stuff. Or just go for the walk with the missus, with the dogs, or just chill out. And that was actually one of the biggest things that ever changed the performance of some of the athletes we work with. They learned how to recover, because when they recover, they come back and train better. So you get better adaptation, so to speak. You can't get adaptation from people who are tired constantly because they don't train with the same intensity. And if you don't train with intensity, we don't get the... So, I mean, it sounds basic, but it is basic. I'm all for fundamentals, this is the days you're going to train, and actually then creating an environment that they want to come to week in, week out, because that's more important to me than anything, which is you can pick the best exercise selection. You've got to be astute to a point, but like, if you don't turn up, it doesn't matter. You can think you've got the best program in the world, but if you don't turn up, it doesn't matter. And I just think we created something quite special in that they turn up week in, week out, and if they're not with me and they can't make it, they've got the app on their phone and they follow the program and they link in. I can see them complete it and they ask me any questions. But we've developed consistency. And if you look at obviously the best known athletes, I know you obviously work with a lot of them, but if you look at Paddy over 4 years, the change in him is because he did nothing and now he did something. And over the 4 years he's developed, and that's come across in his physical structure, obviously, and his but in his performance generally. He's since losing them 2 world titles in Cage Warriors and that horrendous quarters after that, when I started working with him, he's on a winning streak. But you can see his physical development is because, for all the things said about him and all the other athletes, they turn up and there's some decent structure, John, and they know when to have a day off or a deload week, so to speak.
I'm going to ask you specifically about Paddy in a little bit, but a couple of things that, from my experience of martial arts, and perhaps it ties into one of the reasons why I do this particular podcast, where I speak largely to coaches and people around the sport. And I thought that it was important to shine a light on the coaches, because I feel like they have a really big responsibility. And excuse me for saying this, but I was more thinking of the martial arts head coach, because I see them as tribal leaders. And often as students, we go to those individuals and we ask them about all kinds of different advice. Now, that sometimes comes from the student, but also I think there's a bit of an old school approach with martial arts and combat sports, and some leaders of gyms are quite prideful. There's maybe some ego and they rule with a bit of an iron fist. And I wonder how much of a challenge it has been for guys like you to, excuse the phrasing, but muscle in alongside some of these more traditional coaches, where they feel like they know it all, and then you're coming in and you want to speak to another guy at the same level of seniority almost. I'm sure there's a lot of mutual respect. Be like, okay, coach, tell me what you did, because I need to now adjust my program. And sometimes, I don't know, I just feel like it hasn't always been the biggest kind of sharing environment where there are lots of different people involved. Am I correct in my assessment?
Absolutely.
And if I am,
yeah.
Okay. So that's really interesting. So how have you managed to gain the respect, if you will, and get to a point where you are able to produce results? Because otherwise you'll be, I'm sure, banging your head against a brick wall.
I mean, look, I think first and foremost, got to mention Paul Rimmer, because obviously I work with a hell of a lot of next generation athletes. And let's be honest, that gym's on fire, generally as a gym. Paul, I trained there, to be fair. I've I've done one-to-ones with Paul directly. I've trained in the gym, but and he'd had a number of people working with him. But actually, he's helped because he absolutely bought in the less is more structure kind of stuff. And I've got to give a shout out to Paul, because Paul is open to say to his athletes, almost to a point like, I don't want you working with anybody but Paul Reed. Like, and they push it, and Ellis and Adam, and which is fine. But I keep saying, just hang on a minute. You've got a big gym, and I don't think I've got the capacity, if I'm honest. But I'll always advise. But he knows he's come from the times when they did. I mean, there had a lot of people missing weight and doing hard weight cuts and stuff. So we kind of bought in. So I've got to give him a shout out, because he pushes them, including his youth athletes who come through that have developed so well.
Oh, by the way, I've seen him in the gym alongside his athletes going through the programs as well. So it's 100% buy-in, even from a personal standpoint as well.
But I will say there's been, I mean, I have had issues with coaches that don't believe perhaps trying to do less is more worked. But over time, I think if there's one thing that works for me, John, is I'm an older individual, 57 next birthday, and I think that carries a little bit of gravitas in that I'm not a kid just coming to the sport and just come out of uni and trying to tell you all the science. And I think ultimately also, and I am outspoken about this, I use language that people can understand. I guess of having a lot of years at the head of a business, and I've become a decent communicator that people would believe in me, because ultimately, I think the big thing that stands out for me, I'm not trying to sell you something to start with. I'm trying to sell you the passion for doing things right, or for caring for your athletes. And I think that does carry some weight, because I've been fortunate of owning and selling a business, from a limited education, working class background. It gave me the ability to do more, perhaps, without the need to earn. So I don't have to push myself all over socials and push what I do with Paddy and stuff like that. And I think it carries a little bit of weight that I'm not going there because I just want money off you. I want to come and talk to you because I believe in the right things for this sport. And from running my events when I was trying to stop athletes doing horrendous weight cuts, and I was interviewing them after, and I used to have Chris Lamb at my regional events at weigh-ins that was never seen in any regionals, because I wanted to look at people doing cuts and stuff like that.
Chris is a doctor that works with the UFC.
Sorry. So that I think people can see a passion actually that a lot of the stuff I do was not always chargeable. I'm like, look, I'm happy to give some advice, but of course, if you're coming to work with me one-to-one or coming into the gym, and there's gonna be some fee, but like ultimately, I think I got some respect because I'm just passionate about trying to do things right in the sport, which not only improves performance but makes people safer, really, and they have a life outside.
Where does that come from? Where does that come from, Paul? Because we'll speak about your work with the youth stuff in a little bit, but one of my key things I wanted to talk to you about was like where you do a lot, and we're going to layer that, but why?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think because I become, from nowhere, I became a leader and a senior manager in a huge business, and I thought, how the hell did I end up here? And I guess because I didn't plan for it, but generally I became good at leading or communicating with people, I guess, and I always had a passion, and I can't tell you where it comes from, but I like to see other people do well. It's a genuine, something that feeds me, and I always say to people, find something that feeds you in life. It's more important than money. And a lot of them people that through business are now some of the leaders in their fields and doing incredibly well. And I guess ultimately it's like, I like coaching. I like trying to get the best out of people. Carries a lot of pressure, that. But I've been around the sport a lot, and there's not a lot of the disciplines I haven't done. And I've done things really stupidly and had some horrific injuries and done some pretty bad stuff myself. And it was a recognition of we could do this better, because I love the sport of martial arts generally, but mixed martial arts. I mean, I love the sport. I'm passionate for it. So when you see some of the things over the years of obviously people failing safe MMA brain scans and having to come away from the sports, we've seen kids die on the scales in Ireland, let's be honest, weight cutting dangers. The girl that lost all the skin on her legs from overheating and then being left in the cryotherapy unit, all this kind of stuff that goes on.
Jesus.
As well as obviously people dying from head trauma. I guess it's just a care. I just have a care generally that I want to try and make a difference. And actually, at the moment, I think we've gone very sciencey and very sexy about weight cutting, and actually, I still think we missed the point really about what's happening at the grassroots. How can we develop the sport to make these people safer? Because ultimately, for me, that's what it's all about. And I do say this:
Right.
risk and reward. You have a life outside of combat sport. Please do the best you can to be healthy as you can be when you come out of it. Because sometimes some of these strategies definitely don't help for that, if I'm honest. So
Yeah.
it's a hard one to say. It's a passion, and sometimes, John, I put myself under pressure. I'm not going to lie. I take too much on. I don't say no enough. But most of the athletes I work with, and if I list through them, a lot of them come to me after times of missing weight, having horrendous weight cuts, of losing fights, or just doing things badly. And that's how I ended up working with them, to see them today winning, being successful, more healthy, and all the rewards they get from it financially from being successful as well. I mean, that feeds me as much as being a paid coach, as much as it being a business, that feeds me probably more.
So I guess we got to establish how you sort of came involved in martial arts, because you've mentioned a couple of times your work with a big corporate, Mercedes-Benz, if I'm not mistaken. I know you had a huge dealership. So a lot of the time one would look at that and go, well, there's not a lot of time for anything else. So how has this person been able to indulge in something, develop the skills, etc. But clearly performance and you must have been doing something yourself. So I guess the question is, how far back does your love and participation in combat sports go?
8 years of age on the judo mat with the RAF judo team, which my dad was involved in, so bizarrely, which I did really well, and I kind of excelled as a junior, but for some reason they liked me, and I went to go all around the country with them doing exhibitions and things. So I was the first photographs of me, I think, was age 8 in the gi and stuff like that. So that ultimately was a passion. I did quite well. My problem as a child, John, was that I was a bit mischievous and didn't like authority much, and all the things that I probably tell people not to be like now. But that was my first, and then I got into amateur boxing, and I had I can't say career because it's not a career, but I boxed, and I really loved that. And when I was good and turned up and would listen, I was good. And when I didn't, I wasn't that good, and ended up being reprimanded by the coaches a lot. I kickboxed with a really good team and went out nationally to compete and stuff like that. And I still Thai boxed, and I did with Master Sken as well. He was a legend at the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember.
And still, and the beauty with my corporate, I guess, careers was we were building a business and buying businesses, and I was living in all kinds of areas of the country, from London, Reading, Swindon, Newbury, into the Midlands, and I got to train with a lot of different people, which was great because I got all kinds of experiences. This was mainly jiu-jitsu. But the big thing, and I do want to mention it, about 12, 13 years ago, I went to a place called Shinobi, which is what I named my MMA show after, which was run by the partner in McGregor Fast, Colin Byrne. So him and Dr. Jules. Yeah.
Yes, of course, he's got his academy in Portugal.
Well, I went there nearly every year, but I did training camps with athletes there. So I'd go and train. It was 4 hours a day, 2 hours jits, 2 hours striking, you'd spar. You'd just have the best week. A gym over the pool, over the beach. We do surf jitsu, as in we try and surf in a gi, believe it or not, out in the water in the gi. But you met people like Connor was there at the time. I was John Cav would be coaching there. Gunnar Nelson would be there. It was a great gym. I've become very close friends with Colin. We still are now, and I still go to see him. I've only been to see him this year.
I've got a lot of time for Colin. He's really lovely. He's helped me out navigating the Conor McGregor sphere, if you will. Really, really lovely fella, and knows his onions as well.
Oh yeah, talented martial artist. But he was I always say this, he was the coach that made an impression on me. We obviously they give me a little award at the end of this training week where, to be fair, I was way levels down behind some of the athletes, but I'll give them all a go for the week, and left myself pretty broken at the end. And they give me a little award of kind of like the best, the best athlete for approaching that week. And we used to do things like sit on the bottom of a pool, Navy SEAL training, but you put weights on top of you so you couldn't get off the bottom, and you'd look at your opponent that you're about to have a bout with, and you'd just sit and look at each other at the bottom of the pool, and it was first to break away. All about this mental strength and stuff. But Colin was a coach who got the best out of me. He made a big impression. And it was that 12 years ago that probably when I started being more linked, because I still saw the athletes there doing mad stuff. Even though they're all getting ready for big fights, but they're doing some seriously mad stuff in how they believe conditioning and nutrition. But I trained everywhere and done a lot. And I'm not really, obviously running a big business means I didn't always have the time to go and do it. But I'd probably train 3 to 4 times a week. As soon as I finish work, I'd be off. I'd be off to train. And because I was the boss, so to speak, I could have a couple of hours off in the morning if I wanted and go somewhere. But that made a big impression on me, that. And if I'm honest, I probably raised the intensity of my training at that time. Well, that's 12 years ago, and I was 43. Then had a serious injury that took me 2 years to recover, and then a serious illness, John, that left me 6 months in hospital. So ultimately, I guess I would say that was my point of passion of being involved in the performance of the sport. Colin Burns said to me, you should give something back. You've got the ability to give something back. It was him that said it to me. And it was then when I worked and obviously speak to Colin, Dr. Jules I met, who was the other half of McGregor Fast. Obviously, go on to see how successful he's been. But it's all them good people you meet in the sport that makes a difference to me, but it is part of my journey as well, I guess. So Shinobi's always will be. And as long as I can keep moving, I will go there every year.
Oh, I really want to go myself, actually. I've seen some of these camps take place and looked over with envy. Our icon jiu-jitsu, Zé Marcelo, he does a camp down in Ericeira in Portugal. I don't know if they do the surfing in the gi, but they try and blend a little surfing with jiu-jitsu as well. So that's everyone comes back just having the best times. And isn't it interesting how there's... I've been very close to the explosion of Irish mixed martial arts and the success of John Kavanagh and his team, and had conversations, quite a few actually, with Colin and the Doc and a few others. So isn't it funny how we've got such a small sport with people doing really great work, all around the world, just from these small neck of the woods that we inhabit.
It's something I've always said that I've got a lot of people still call me boss and gaffer for being like in the corporate world, right? But genuinely, I've met better people with more integrity that have become close friends through MMA than I ever have in business. Let me tell you that. Like, I've met some of the best people that'll be my closest friends for a long time through mixed martial arts, and I'm grateful for that. I'm not saying I've met good people in business, but I've met worse people in business I have in MMA, so right. I'm grateful that that kind of story of that long relationship with Colin and how much affection we have for each other still all them years later, there's just the little things of why I love the sport, I guess.
Well, you're talking about the time spent, and one of the things that I'm interested in exploring is like the biggest differences that you've seen in the approach to performance. And I think you've touched on it, but maybe just if you can, with your articulate nature, sort of encapsulate where we were 15 years ago to where we are now. Like the biggest key differences.
Well, the strategies within nutrition, I think, the clarity within like nutrition, I think has definitely made a difference. I'm not saying it's got across to everybody, but 15 years ago, let's be honest, there was some horrendous practices taking place. It generally were people would sit in saunas for almost 2 days before they were getting ready to fight, or they just weren't eating, and carbohydrates seemed then to be the devil to everybody, But I think the big thing for me is structure around strength and conditioning. There's some brilliant coaches. There's not enough in the trenches, I will say that. But there's people that realise that perhaps they've got to reduce sparring wars, and because it's no longer deemed to be healthy, because a lot of the research now is showing, there's the damage of CTE long term. Of course, that's everywhere. So sparring wars, probably, I see there's less of them, definitely, and I've been involved in some of them. But then I think there's a better approach to, you don't have to kill yourself every single day. And actually, that's not how sport is done. The best sporting people in the world know when to recover. So, and then maybe, you've mentioned, so we've still got the old school approach and the egos and the things around it, but I think a lot of people have started to realise that we've got to treat this sport, mainly because of the technical development, that even you see some of these amateurs and just come back from the Worlds and see these kids, the technical development now is outstanding. And maybe all the things around them being athletes now, classed as athletes. And I think that's probably the biggest change. They weren't considered to be athletes. They're called fighters. We call them athletes now because they are athletes and they need to think and behave like an athlete. I think that's the biggest change. There's a realisation that you are probably the highest load athlete there is out of any sport, and you need to treat that accordingly. So it's still there, but there's less of it. You know, I still think there's still madness goes on, and even at the highest level, let's be honest, John, we've seen at UFC where people have virtually collapsed on scales, and you know we still see it on the highest level, but there's less of it. I think it's improving. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I've seen so many small changes. I often kind of retell this story from being involved in MMA for a very long time, and it's going to look bad on the people around me, but I've never been the greatest student. I should always caveat that. But I went and did a little stint in triathlon, and I managed to go and see like a pretty decent triathlon coach. And just because of load, etc., I'd never salt sticks and rehydration tablets. Super cheap, very available. Never once had I seen them on the mats in my time doing MMA, jiu-jitsu, etc. Coconut water was about the best thing, and we always used to brag about it. And actually, I used to remember Carl Pendrid. I remember when he got a little sponsorship with Vita Coco, and it was like I'd been endorsed because I was drinking coconut water and there was a high-level athlete that was doing the same. But now I won't go to a training session without these sorts of things. And I just looked at triathlon where you've got quite a middle class participation, probably a little bit higher net worth. These bikes are a lot of money. And of course that attracts a lot of science and scientists that are willing to put the work in because they're getting compensated for it. So it may be exciting about how far we've got to go in combat sports because we are the poor cousin a lot of the time. But there seems to be a lot of stuff that we can still improve on for human performance.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where we started out. It was like it's fundamentals, isn't it? I mean, whilst sports science pushes it this way, but if you think about it, electrolytes, carb gels, simple carbohydrate, I mean, they're fundamentals that work really, really well, you know. And then I don't have to blind you with science to try and advise you to add something, you know, as in make sure you take enough carbohydrate and give you some options of what, you know, the simple options of carbohydrate are that you can keep in your bag every day, you know. So it has changed because, you know, people recognise that there's fundamentals that are easily to achieve. Going back to that statement I made, but like we've got to give people simple options they can do every day that'll make a difference. And some of the things you mentioned are the options that they can easily manage every single day because it's one is it's affordable and two is it's very effective. And actually, like most things in life, it's the small things that if you do the small things incredibly well, you'll find that like your performance will be enhanced.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about the training, you know, you're getting a lot of conditioning, etc. And one of the things that I've heard some coaches say with regard to then like doing the running or doing various circuits or certain things that one might do in isolation in a gym, as opposed to specificity. Have you had many arguments over the years, or maybe not? Maybe it's not an argument at all, but that kind of role of specificity versus actually doing a certain type of deadlift, or I'm going to get it wrong, Paul, because my strength and conditioning program is pretty rudimentary, but like pulling stuff off the floor, pulling yourself up or pushing stuff off, you know, how much time you should do that versus how much like you're getting from specific training, the specificity of the desired art.
I think so. Yeah. So two things. We generally in the sport twice a week is what we need for strength and power training. So that's kind of it. So right. We used to call it condensed conjugate, which is our West Side Barbell way of doing things. I mean, I don't use the word conjugate anymore, but it's basically full body strength. You're going to do a lower and upper body push pull, and you're going to pick the fundamental lifts like you mentioned: deadlift, squats, back squats, this kind of stuff. So you're going to you're going to squat and you're going to hinge. We'll use a mix of whether we do bilateral or unilateral exercises. I do use like it's called triphasic way through periodization, which is simply put, which is eccentric loading at one phase, isometric loading with some contrast work, second phase, and last phase, the peaking phase, that race to force development was all concentric. So there's some periodization around it, but ultimately, if I say there's a bigger challenges I've had is when somebody comes to me ready to lift and they've just been sent for half an hour hill sprints or just done 400 meters around the track with somebody and they're coming to me and there's no point in lifting because they're burnt. So there's some of the things I still see that I've got to have a conversation about. That's all fine, they can do that, but timing's everything, that kind of stuff. Right. So I'll give you an example, hopefully it simplifies it for anybody maybe listening, is that if I we have a big squad day on a Wednesday and a weekend with some of the next gen crew. And you'll see them actually in racks working in teams, but they will be in separate phases of their plans, depending where they are, depending on fight, whether they've got a fight, whether in camp or out of camp or what stage they are. But on a Wednesday, when they come to me, they've had a couple of hours in the morning, generally technical, not super high intensity. But I'm not going to add any conditioning to that session. They'll fuel, they'll come, and we'll lift them, we'll rest. We always do some contrast work, contrast being lift something heavy, and then have something lighter from a power exercise. But ultimately, they're going to rest. But on the weekend, they've got time. They've got time to rest. And on the weekend, we'll add some conditioning, depending on what phase they're at within that camp. So that could be anything from ATP, so that 6 to 10 second high intensity stuff, or there could be longer than Jordan's work, depending where they are in the camp. So there's a reason we do that. It's because they're fresh on the weekend, they're not fresh when they come after technical. And that, again, to me feels basics. Is I don't want to overtrain them. I don't want to detrain them. Some of the mistakes I think I would say I made, which was I used to plan people every 4 weeks for the deload. I try and assess that now, depending on how I think where the athlete is, how they're performing, how they're reporting their readiness scores. But actually, for example, there'll be an athlete that's gone training away at another gym for the week and had really high intensity sparring every day because that's why they go to another gym. And that's when I'd probably plan the deload. So, I probably think maybe I was having a detraining effect and deloading when they don't need to because we're already putting nice rest in. So, but as far as lifts and exercise, it's the good fundamentals of, making sure that they've got some progressive overload in place. We're getting them stronger. They don't, they're not working in high reps. It's always that start of camp, which is a bit higher volume and low intensity, and the back end of camp, which is very low volume and higher intensity stuff, low intensity at start of camp. So it's the basic principles apply. You see all the lifts they do, all the lifts you'll be familiar with, John. Deadlifts, bench press.
I was going to say, if you got some people might be, I'm certainly interested in, if I'm going to the gym and I don't really know what I'm doing, what would be like the 3 or 5 best for someone like me who does like to try and, well, I'm more of a grappler these days, but say I'm an MMA athlete. What would you say would be the 5 to kind of focus in on?
If I was breaking it down to be really basic, like either do a hinge or a squat, so a deadlift or a back squat of sorts. That would be your lower. And then maybe after your lift, you're going to do a broad jump or a box jump, or you'll do something contrast. That's as simple as that, yeah? No more than 3 sets of maximum 6 reps. That's all you need to do. And then you could do bench press, some kind of maybe med ball throw for the contrast again, and then you'll row. So it's push, pull, and that's the way we think about it. And then you'll row, and then we carry, and then some kind of rotation work. So that the most simple way I could explain it to anybody in real layman's terms is lower body push, pull, put some contrast work in. Because if you look at all the research, actually the most basic principle research is a heavy exercise with a contrast exercise will work. But knowing that you're going to progressive overload somewhere, you've got to make sure that you're not static. You're not always going to have to do. You're not going to do the same reps in the same weight constantly. You're going to change that slightly. So, and that's carry some stuff and then do some ballistics, throw some med balls. Stuff that they all love. That kind of stuff. Jumps, plyometrics. That's one thing that we've added. Is a lot of plyometric work. Plyometrics, jumps, throws, that kind of stuff, certainly within warm-ups. But that's the basics, yeah. A deadlift, for example, so I can roll one off, a deadlift, a box jump, a bench press, a med ball chest pass, a dumbbell row, maybe some accessories, biceps, triceps, delts can just work. Go and carry some stuff with a farmer's walk and then throw some med balls rotationally into a wall. There you go. That's kind of how it looks. And actually, I mean, that's effective. People, the guys tend to like that structure, and if they're deadlifting one session, they may be back squatting the next session and so on. And if they're doing a flat bench on one session, they'll maybe do a push press, overhead press in the next session. But basically still that push-pull kind of way of doing things. But we test them, John. I will say that we do test them. So we use velocity testing to get some numbers. So we know who's the strength dominant athlete and maybe those who need more strength and those actually that we need to develop rate of force development because they don't deliver enough power, i.e. we don't move stuff fast enough. So we do have a little bit of work around that. There's objectives around their planning, but that is the basic structure. It feels very basic, but I do look at people's programs and I do look, somebody comes to work with us and see what they're doing and I see 20 reps of shit going on and and loads of volume and this bodybuilding splits that they're doing and all that kind of stuff. And that's what we're trying to get away from. It's like, that's not the way to train for a combat athlete. So,
okay. We've mentioned nutrition a number of times. Where in the hierarchy does nutrition stack up in level of importance compared to strength work and conditioning?
I mean, I was actually on a podcast of that Sweet Science of Fighting. The guy's top level as a scientist. I'm never good in an environment because he was really interviewing me about the science of everything. And I'm never put myself out. I never use the word science because I'm not a sports scientist, right? I didn't go. But ultimately what I was trying to say, it doesn't matter how well I structure programming for strength and conditioning if the athlete isn't fueled well enough.
Right.
So it and I'm very outspoken on this. It's like, how many people talk about the science of strength and conditioning and get the best out of athletes but never ask a question how they're eating and what they're eating and how they feel to prepare and how they feel to recover and actually how they're feeling. What's your subjective scoring on your readiness? You can do more objective testing where you can put them on the jump mat, for example, and you can, for example, or actually moving the bar of any sort. Velocity drop can show that your central nervous system is fatigued. Right. I find a lot of that is food. I find this overtraining, and I think I said it before, John, is that we talk a lot about overtraining syndrome. It brings all kinds of things, pain, injuries, lack of sleep. Most of that is down to not fueling correctly with carbohydrate, not having enough glycogen availability. So it's massive to me. It's the biggest part of it, which is why I think my role works a bit, because I'm obsessed with asking them what you're eating. I think we have the advantages at the Athlete Factory where they're most of them train because they all go upstairs to my cafe upstairs that fuels them.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
So, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what level. It could be the best strength and conditioning coach in the world. If they don't eat correctly, it's pointless. So it's everything to me. I don't know why in this day and age, in 2024, we've still got athletes scared of carbohydrate, that they believe that they're not losing weight because they eat too much carbs and they cut carbs early. And it's bizarre to me, which carbohydrate is their best friend in the world.
Right.
So that's everything to me. I mean, you eat enough protein. You probably you're low fat because you need to create this gap for carbohydrate, because most of them, especially in camp, they've got a lot of weight to lose. So they're dealing with big calorie deficits. So so your tricks of fueling them will be everything, John. And ultimately, my job or anybody else's job is pointless if we don't get them to fuel correctly. That's how important it is.
Okay. Yeah. No, it makes absolute sense. But I see how people miss it very, very often. And even like on the very basic level, I often check myself with this. I'm like, why am I eating the same breakfast, lunch, dinner on a day where I'm sitting at my desk as opposed to a day where I might train? And I look at myself and go, it just doesn't make sense. I should definitely try and configure that accordingly. But this is obviously at a very different level. I feel almost bad about bringing this up. I'm going to talk about Paddy. And I would imagine he gives you a lot of nightmares. But the one thing, let me start by saying I've been lucky enough to see Paddy in the gym, close to a fight, and have conversations with him. He looks bloody phenomenal. We've seen the results that he's been getting. Like, he's a physical specimen. But at the same time, and he plays for this, I think that's because he knows, you know, what the end result will be come fight time. But boy, does he look like he gets out of shape. Now, can we talk about if he's very unlucky in the way that his out of camp sort of manifests, or is Paddy, does he need a little bit of a talking to?
Pointless to even try to talk to him. I mean, listen, John, I get a lot of messages about why I allow him to do things. I'm like, look, he's his own man. But
of course,
I think I only did one interview before, I think with Jordan Sullivan, when he mentioned it. And I'm like, put things in perspective. When he went to America, that was the worst he ever got. Like, that was horrendous, like horrendous. However, since then, and they're putting things in perspective, from when he gets in the cage to fight, so when he fought Bobby Green, he's about 6 kilos heavier than that now.
Right.
So that don't sound bad, right?
That's not that bad. No,
so,
not at all.
Unfortunately, Paddy, and actually, if he took his shirt up, he's still got abs.
Sorry,
right?
That is not bad at all. Thinking about it, I know people that are like 20 kilos out sometimes.
Well, it might be 20 kilos from what they weighed in at, rather than 20 kilos on what they.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
It's very different by the time they're fueled and getting. Now he was lighter this time. Weren't too happy with the weight he went to in America against Tony, if I'm honest. But that's all the temptation America brings, unfortunately. Whereas this time I controlled generally, I guess, what went in his mouth.
Right.
Generally, because we didn't want to utilise the wrong foods, and generally we did a much better job. And shout out to UFC PI team, Dawn and Dan, who I have a brilliant relationship with, that are so reactive and so supportive, and like, they're brilliant. Yeah, to be fair.
And how does that work, Paul? Because I would imagine that you guys you're operating in the same area, and again, you know, this might be a reflection of my personality, but there's almost a competition there in some respects, and maybe, you know, I'm better than you are. How can you tell me what to do? So how does it work for guys in your position, and then what the UFC PI can offer?
I will say, first and foremost, I am absolutely somebody that never puts myself in competition, doesn't think I'm any better than anyone. I'm just working in the sport, hence why, I guess, again, there's nothing for sale when you see my socials, or, you know, I'm not buying my PDF for it. Like, I don't put myself in that position. It's borderline kind of imposter syndrome. I don't feel like I'm at the top of the game, and I want to be, you know, even want to be the top of the game. I feel I'm, from an evidence-based perspective, I'm pretty good, and from a results-based perspective, it's, you know, a long time of good foundations of people doing well. But ultimately, they always get in touch. I mean, I make them talk to me direct, and not the athletes. So there's things I ask for. I don't want them engaging with my athletes, because they'll either maybe not tell you the truth, or it'll stress them out. I don't want them thinking about anything about fuel or nutrition, or like, I'm going to manage that for them, take it away from them. Over time, with the PI teams changed from when Clint was there, and then obviously he left. I used to have some great late night conversations in London with Clint over a beer or two, put the worlds to rights. But with the PI team, I just think under Charles, I've just developed a good relationship where they'll put me in a little WhatsApp group with them, and then just say what you need. And I do, this time in Manchester, I did a lot of the food myself, so I could be in control. And then the food I did need for them, I just send them, they do it. It's a brilliant working relationship. And I don't know why more events don't do what UFC do, John. I tried to do this for PFL and thought it went really well, but unfortunately the PFL top brass didn't want to buy into it, which was fueling the athletes after the weigh-ins. Like, trying to give them
even that. I mean, because when you talk about what the PI offer is extensive, but you mean from a nutrition, fueling, meal prep standpoint?
Just giving them the right drinks and the right gels available, making sure they talk to them if they need any help and advice, because that's a big role of the PI. They make sure that they're there to talk to if you need advice. Now, they'll tell you that, unfortunately, I mean, not a lot of people arrive with somebody who's working with their fighters in nutrition, because some of the guys at the lower level can't afford that potentially,
No.
so they're dealing
No.
with the head coach, and what they say is a lot of them don't even engage with them, which is mental to me. But I do think people or head coaches can be protective. They don't want to give their weight to the fighters every morning. Maybe they fear that they might get caught out because they know they're doing the big cut. And I know that happens, but with me, I'm transparent. I'll tell them what the weight is of starting the fight week at Sunday. I'll tell them every morning where they are and what percentage they've got left to do, and then I ask them for stuff. And they're honestly, especially with Dawn and Dan, and Dawn in particular, not only just great people to build a relationship with, but like so helpful. Like literally, it's just so incredibly helpful. So I've got to give them a shout out. It makes life easier. But I do feel that when you speak to them, and this is a big thing for me, John, is that they've got a passion for doing it right as well. And I think if you want to work in this sport, and I always try and keep things positive, but I think we've gone a bit sexy on weight making and Instagram and what a UFC athlete does. But I want to see the passion in people of doing things right. I just work in the sport because you really want to do things right, because weight making is dangerous. Like it doesn't matter how well you think your strategy is, there's risk in it every time, John. Every single time you put weight with an athlete, you do have risk. So
talk to me about those risks. What do you mean specifically?
Well, two things. Overheating. I mean, people talk about dehydration is the biggest risk. I actually think overheating is one of the biggest risks. So exposed to extreme heat. So that's the biggest risk. So
using either like a hot bath or sauna, you mean?
Yeah. So too much time. I
guess even in plastics if you're having a workout in plastics, that can still be a risk, right?
Yeah, which is always confusing. I mean, I work with a number of the boxers, and it confuses the hell out of me. They turn up for strength and conditioning with a sweatsuit on. It's like, get that off. I mean, why do you live your life in a sweatsuit? It's bizarre, But like, you still see that. But yeah, overheating is this. You went to any medical doctor, A&E doctor, or put them around weight cutting, they'd have a heart attack themselves. It's like, my God, what are you doing? And this is the thing, I guess, when you involve academia and dietitians and nutritionists within combat sport, you are doing the exact opposite that you will be taught. You're breaking every rule, and that ultimately, of course, you can monitor. I mean, I have things like making sure that stats are monitored: oxygen, heart rate, blood pressure. They're always wearing something within the bath where I can monitor heart rate. So you keep basics. But unfortunately, how many times have we seen, John, that an athlete has fell over and split their head open because they've collapsed after doing the bath because they've left to do it on their own, or collapsed in the sauna? That'll tell you, how many times have we seen an athlete do such a bad cut that they've not made it to fight day because they've gone to hospital? A lot of that has been dehydration, but I actually think overheating is a real problem that could kill somebody. So, there's risk in it. And I think that's the biggest of all the fears I have, is that for all the work's gone into the science and all the talk and all the sexiness on Instagram, is that we've got a hell of a lot of risk still taking place in the sport, even at the top level, never mind at the lower level. And that needs breaking along the way. Going back to the UFC guys, they really work hard to try and monitor that around the athletes, but they're only as good as the feedback, aren't they? If the coach doesn't want to talk to them and the athlete doesn't want to talk to them, they can't force it, can they? So.
What one or two of the things that you see consistently people getting wrong when it comes to weight cutting?
Number one, over water loading. I remember speaking to a Croatian guy that one of the management companies asked me to help. He was fighting for the world title on Bellator. And he was drinking 12 litres of water a day in his water load. And
Jesus.
So this understanding the water load, or too many days do it. He started that 10 days out. So like.
No, he didn't.
Yeah. So
12 litres for 10 days. Jesus.
Yeah, so where he should have been. Like, we normally work around the basic principle, 0.1 litres per kilo. That's generally what it is. So if you think about 10% of the weight, so 70, you're going to do 7. If you're 60, you're going to do 6, that kind of stuff. But we only do that for 3 days, and that's done. It drops by half of that, and then down to the last bit of water the day before. So water loading is a danger. Starting the sweat far too early is a danger. Cutting food out. I mean, the amount of people, you hear this, and I've worked with them, and I work with especially females, because it's so damaging to females, but going down to 800 calories on fight week and all this nonsense. cutting carbs out a month before. They're all the things that are going on in the sport. Low energy availability is a real risk. So, to male and female, but certainly to female, the loss of menstrual cycle is quite common, and it can have dramatic effects to a female's health. So, but in men, again, there's many studies of people who've done horrendous weight cuts where they've seen some of the lowest testosterone ever seen in males, because that's the damage that will happen on the back of it.
Wow.
And obviously there's the bit of research about being dehydrated and being punched in the head, John. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's not.
And they're all the risks. But I think for me, that if I pick the number one, it's heat exposure, like too much heat exposure. And if we mentioned that earlier, if I think about that poor girl that, was so severely damaged from losing skin on her legs and stuff, that's because she had heat exhaustion, and the way they dealt with that, because I think she had almost 18 hours in the sauna. So
18 hours in a sauna. How
I
can
am seeing
anyone
that.
think?
Yeah, I know. But I've seen, John, I wouldn't mention any names, but I've been at UFC and I've seen guys cutting their weight 18 hours before, starting in sweatsuits, grappling, wrestling in sweatsuits for, like, on the Thursday. So I've seen a Wednesday night and Thursday morning thing for the Friday morning weigh-in, still starting their sweat. So, yeah, there's still madness that goes on, but, like, I don't know, it's hard to change that, because a lot of these guys aren't working with people perhaps that would want to change it. Or I do know nutritionists that have walked away because their head coach is not interested.
Right. Yeah. Sounds horrendous. Like 15 minutes in the sauna. I mean, I know there are different temperatures, but that seems, and that's not in plastics. That's enough for me. Anything more than that just sounds, and I can only imagine, is an absolute nightmare. But and I know that that's light work compared to what a lot of the athletes do. But I see stuff, and I do question it. But then I think, who am I to question? After, especially with like wrestling and some of the culture that was built into the hot workout rooms and cutting weight, etc. I'd love to get to a point. Some people would hate me for saying it, but like, if we could just get rid of all of that and fight natural weight classes, I know it's a pie in the sky dream, but that seems like a much more sensible approach.
It does, but then how do you benchmark natural weight? Body fat percentage, or so there is some difficulty around that as well. The biggest thing for me that makes the biggest sense is, and this is reaching out to all organisations, and actually even UFC to a point. Why do we have a culture where we allow the athlete to tell the promotion what weight category they're going to fight at? I've said this to PFL at the time. I had a little bit of involvement with them. I said to Dan, and Dan was fully behind it, which was, why don't you make them, because, for example, I watched the PFL with a number of fighters missing weight, right? So, and we, that no promotion wants a fighter missing weight. It messes the whole payment structure out, obviously. It can put the fight in jeopardy. So, my point is, for example, I have a lot of athletes come to me. I put them up a weight because they can't make the weight, but they have made the weight, but they've been so severely ill. But they've made it. I've got athletes come to me that didn't make weight. I started working with Molly when she missed weight at her UFC debut. She missed weight. Right. That wasn't because she couldn't make the weight. That was because of poor strategies, right? But then I'll go to Jack Shaw. Jack Shaw, I asked to come to me I didn't ask him to come to me. I've got to clarify that. I asked him to come and do his body composition because I think the world of Jack and his dad, and I wasn't working with him. But I'd seen him at 2 weigh-ins at bantamweight. And then...
Yeah, it wasn't pretty, was it?
No, and when he came to see myself and Carl at John Moores University, one of the best sports universities in the world, and did DEXA, he can't make that weight. But he had tried to make that weight and worked with somebody quite notable. I'm not trying to be critical, these are facts. And thankfully, Jack went up a weight. Much better athlete for it, but certainly much healthier for it. And that, for me, is everything, right? Like, this sport can be short, and some people can make a real living out of it, and some people will still need to work after it, but nobody wants to risk their health. And for me, it's like, before you ever work with an athlete, before anybody talks about weight, like, clarify they can make the weight. There's nothing more simple to me. I invested about 15 grand on a medical body composition analysis made by Saker, which they use at the uni as well after DEXA because it does hydration status. But it's about as good as it gets after DEXA, really. DEXA's the gold standard. But how many athletes have been on that and I've said, like, you can't make the weight. You just can't make weight. Which is great because they go up a weight and then actually you see their careers, flourish on the back of it. So it's a big one for me. It's like these short notice fights worry me because, Jake, talk about Jake quickly. It went well for Jake, but he had a horrendous weight cut because he was so heavy going in.
Jake Hadley,
yeah,
Manchester.
Sorry, yeah, Jake Hadley, yeah. He had a great performance in the end, but like he was ill. Right. He recovered okay. He was ill, but like he was at the right weight, but then he had to cut too much weight because he was too far out. But I always think if you've got athletes missing weight, I think a promotion to say, right, you need to go to a university or somebody that can confirm to me you can make the weight, and you come back with a tick from a sports science environment to say yes they can or no they can't, and if no they can't, they have to move up a weight. Sounds quite.
That's interesting, yeah. Well, it also, I think that fighters should be fined, by the way, and sometimes I question whether it's enough given what's at stake at the highest level. But now it sort of removes a bit of an excuse. I don't mean to sound harsh, but if you're coming into the UFC, for example, and you're trying to make that weight and then you miss, but then you find out they were never actually going to make it, then you might say, well, their enthusiasm got the better of them, and perhaps they didn't have the resources available to try and help with that decision. So then it takes less of the blame off. But if you know that you can make it, then there's been some examples recently which I won't speak about, but there was a particular one in the last couple of months where a lot of the people around me, former fighters, were very, very disappointed. And you think, well, you can make it. And actually, I think you've moved up a weight. So it's like, this is awful.
Yeah, look, it's always going to be, the sport's never going to change, John. Nobody's going to fight at this walk-around weight because then we'll get into this, what is a walk-around weight, discussion. So there's going to be weight cutting. I think there's some basic principles you can put in about body composite, because what you're playing with is body fat, right? So you can only get them to a certain level. Before then, you can then work out maybe hydration status, and then start making some calculations. That's about as simple as it gets. There's many athletes come in and you look at them from a body composition and you think, right, I can get you down to where you would deem the lowest position we could get you to from a body fat percentage, and you'd still have to cut like 15% in body weight from gut manipulation and dehydration. Well, that's not acceptable. You want to be no further out than 10% really on the start of fight week, which is always a Sunday for the Friday weigh-in, if that's the weigh-in routine. So I think there's some things you could put in place, I think. But then it needs people to really buy into that. There's a lot of madness that still goes on, but for me, they feel quite basic principles. I don't think that would be hard to achieve, if I'm honest. But whether we ever get there, I don't know. But the nice thing is that, I won't work with an athlete about making weight or nutrition unless they come and stand on that medical body composition analysis tool.
Right.
So
really interesting. Because
that's your duty of care, isn't it? Number one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're potentially putting somebody at risk and doing a weight cut that they really shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. I want to bring up something that's fairly gnarly, and these aren't my words. They are from coaches, and a couple of individual athletes have actually sort of shared this with me. And that's eating disorders. And it is linked to the conversation we're having around weight cutting, weight management, because I've come across a bunch of fighters that are utterly obsessed with food. And then I don't think Sam, my teammate Sam Patterson, will be upset with me sharing this. He's a big guy, 6'3", did all of the scans at the PI, and he was optimal for lightweight. But he moved up to welterweight recently. But I know what he went through and how disciplined he was in order to make 155. Now he's up at 170. He spoke to me literally the other day about how his cravings have changed and how he now doesn't eat the shite food that he previously used to. And I don't know whether there's much science to it, whether it's psychological, but he's just able to maintain a much better overall lifestyle and relationship with food now that he's not having these huge swings. But I don't think many people talk about the glaring eating disorders that we are seeing play out in front of us.
There's actually some research around that, John, and there's a medical condition called hyperphagia, which is generally the result of undereating. So, I mean, you could talk to the ultimate about Paddy. I mean, Paddy's food obsessed. Was he always food obsessed? Probably not as much as he is now, but I don't think he doesn't undereat now, to be fair. But, you know, he has to go in some pretty big deficits, but he's probably an extreme example. But I think they all have this issue because they've had poor nutritional strategies, especially in fight week. You find fight week is the time generally that, one is if you're cutting carbohydrate early and cutting calories too early, like that's going to be an issue. But if you do in fight week, what we find is they start picking the little bits of chicken and eating very simple bits and scared of food, and you know, and that leaves them to be absolutely starving. And there is a, you know, without going to the science, but if anybody wants to look it up, hyperphagia, hyper Phagia, I think spelled, just look it up. It's a real condition, and that's what it is. It's whether you call it an eating disorder or disordered eating, which are two different things really, but ultimately, yeah, the end result is they overeat, and unfortunately they gorge, and it is a problem. What I would say to people is that in fight week, you don't need to eat probably below maintenance. You can eat a lot of calories in fight week. You just got to utilise a higher fat, medium protein, low carbohydrate strategy, but you can get good calories in fight week. And I think the best example we had is that Teddy Stringer over now trains in America with a number of the lads from America, I think from Graham's Academy. He's got over there and fight, and we did fight week prep for them from our cafe to make life easier for them. Which is eating things like high-fat, low-carb cheesecakes, pulled beef with roasted veg, and you know, nice chicken thighs, spiced chicken thighs, and but like the response we got from one of the guys, like he didn't feel starving after the fight. It's the first time he didn't feel like, you know, I had missed out. I need to catch up on all. So maybe that's an example of like you can eat good food on fight week. You don't have to starve yourself, but hyperphagia and the things you're talking about there, and you'll see a lot of it is due to generally undereating. I think two things to it. If you leave yourself getting out of shape, you've got a lot of weight to lose, you'll eat less calories. The most simple basic principle in camp, which is if you've got a lot of body fat to lose, then you're going to have to be in a big deficit. A big deficit means you're not going to have as much fuel as you'd like. So there's number one. Don't start your fight camp being out of shape. Set yourself a percentage above your fight weight and try and stick to it, because that's the biggest problem. Ultimately, calorie deficit is where you lose body fat. Then if you're not really dialed in on how to utilize that fuel, which you've now got to reduce well enough around your training, you may end up with overtraining syndrome as well, and it could end up to all kinds of poor performance. But it's a problem. It's always going to be a problem because we're in a weight making sport, and unless they get really nailed in nutritional strategies, and we keep people. I've got some athletes that are brilliant, John. They stay in camp all year round. Really, they do their training program. They look after nutrition, and then they've got a few kilos to lose to hit that fight week, and then before we go into that kind of chronic phase. But those who do have to lose a lot of weight, then unfortunately they're going to eat less fuel. And the result of that is they're going to overeat probably after.
Right. One other thing, and I don't, this is actually maybe I won't. It's not necessary to name the person, but I think it was put out there publicly. I remember there was it was Conor McGregor, and he was fighting up at 170, and he went to the scales. He's rubbing his belly, and this particular person kind of said, "I would make him cut weights because it was important for me when I was fighting to like suffer. I needed to suffer." And I think sometimes, again, there's this, I don't know, maybe there's obviously psychological elements to this, and there's a degree in which you go to here. But I still feel like there's that gnarly side to our sport where during fight week, you want it to be bad. It's that whole silk bed sheets thing. Don't make it too easy because you want to really fucking hate someone and do some damage. And like, is that a battle again that you're having to kind of confront? Because
less now, John. Definitely less.
Okay, good.
You talk about things.
It wasn't that long ago that this was a conversation.
Yeah, that's probably one I should have raised when you said about things that have changed. I think that's changed. I think people realise I shouldn't have to suffer. But don't get me wrong, different things feed different people. If you talk about psychology, that's placebo. And you shouldn't underestimate placebo in people's preparation. They're like, I see people do mad stuff, but if that's what they think makes them work, make it work, make it work. Like, it doesn't matter. People think I've got to suffer and be angry. And it's like those respectful fighters and those fighters that want to fight at the weigh-ins. It's like, it's kind of like, there's a difference, isn't there, in people's preparation. You've got people that are quite chilled, save it up, and then can put it out on the night, and then people that just need pain and toughness and they go, starts fights with their opponents. That's the way they drive. I haven't got any problem with that, if I'm honest. But if you want to you want to over dehydrate or go into pain with dehydration and heat exhaustion, then however your placebo works, you're not working for yourself there. It's not going to help you with performance, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk to you about something that we're involved together with. Very grateful that you guys invited me into the fold, and it's been a real pleasure to be privy to some of the stuff that you guys are doing at the English Mixed Martial Arts Association. I don't think people fully understand what the association is trying to do for the sport, and we could serve a whole podcast on that. But your involvement specifically is around the performance side of the England national team and the support that you're giving. So I guess one of the things that I would like to get out there is what that level of support is, because hopefully some of the athletes, stakeholders, be that coaches, parents, might pick up on this, and they can then say, I'm not sure that we're fully utilising what is available to us under the Emma banner, if you will.
Yeah, well, can I start with saying, first and foremost, it's been awesome to have you involved, John, because you've been a breath of fresh air, mate. So, and
Thank you very much.
By God, we needed that. I can tell you that. It's kind of brought a fresh impetus behind things. I think it was good to freshen it up, and you freshened it up without a doubt. So, thank you for that.
That's good to know.
It's been, so English Mixed Martial Arts, obviously, first and foremost, it's trying to create English team of competition to facilitate them going to their IMAFs and all the amazing experiences that come from that. My role, vice president, was about trying to support financially, find some funding and just get a bit of structure. But head of performance is why I first joined. And that was because I had a passion for a lot of things in MMA, which was, one is trying to stop poor promotion and like trying to get kids fighting on promotions that are safe. Sounds very basic, right? But like, unfortunately, a lot of people are competing on events that don't have the right medical staff and don't have ambulances and actually not even trained officials, right? So that was something I, considered as duty of care for athletes. Know which shows to fight on. After that, every English MMA athlete, if they want it, because some of them do work with some good guys, so they don't need me, but gets access to free train aerobic-based all year round programming, which we've had a great deal of success on, and I've still got guys years after that still utilise it, so they get all their strength and conditioning program, basically trying to give them some general routine. I'm not a big fan of remote programming because, whilst you can program it, you don't know how they're doing it, when they're away in their own gym. But ultimately, if they haven't got anything in place, it's a lot better than having nothing. Or, going back to what I said before, all they're doing is doing some kind of mad circuits and making themselves sick every day. So we give us some structure around strength and conditioning. I'm available for them to contact me through the app anytime and ask a few questions. And then the big thing is I'll set them, and I do work with a lot of them on, it's advisory, it's weight cut. It's about, and it's there's only so much I can do, John. I don't know how many people I've got on, but like it's extensive how many athletes I've got on that app and on the nutrition app. But the general thing is, hey coach, I'm this weight, I'm fighting on this date, and I need to make this weight. How many calories should they eat, and what should be my carbohydrate, protein, and fat targets? And they have an app that they can link into and start loading their food to the targets. And generally that works well. And on fight week, I'll support them with what the strategy is. So water load, nutritional targets, load them some examples of the food they should utilise that day, and then give them some basics around how to cut the weight and then how to refuel. So, and I have to say, and Paul Kelly especially, because Paul's been unbelievable in his role as that selfless role that you have as head of, the same as Adam Venti. These head coaches don't half have to work, John. It's like, it's kind of the amount of time and effort and money they spend, because it's all voluntary, self-funded stuff, is that you've got to respect that. But Paul Kelly really bought into a point, like I help some of his athletes, but he pushes it everywhere to the team. And that way, and I'm proud to say that when we go to competition, nobody's doing stupid weight cuts for the same day. They've all been educated. We see them all having, being on weight or maybe just at best a kilo, 1 or 2%, easy stuff to do. And generally it's educational, I suppose. It's not that I suppose I am trying to be a coach, but I'm trying to give them some basic tools that they can use, maybe for the rest of their career till they go pro and they can afford people to work with. So the better we are at educating, the easier our job is as a coach, to be fair. And I've got a lot of examples of that, because a lot of the athletes just, all they want is routine. So can I refer to something that showed me what to do? And I'm going to log my data, I'm going to interact, and I'm going to get some feedback. And all English MMA athletes have access to that. So, and to be fair, and it's probably going back to me not saying no enough, but a lot of them athletes have turned pro and they still pull on me for that information. They're no longer part of English MMA, that I don't charge them for, that maybe I should. But that's what we do. What we're trying to do ultimately for me is, I want education to be a part of the sport. I'd like that we can get grassroots level to be pro when they can afford it. And there's more reward for the risk, so to speak. I'd like to get them to a point that we teach them the fundamentals really, really well. And by the time they turn pro, they're still fresh and ready, not already on the end of like a 10, 15 fight amateur career doing horrendous weight cuts and not training properly. And the job is for English MMA is to make them safe on promotions, take them to IMAF, give them education, just turn them into better athletes, but also have somebody to talk to outside of, their own environment. And and your head coach, of course, who's an absolute legend, Mr. Lee, and the work he does for us. We build good relationships with these coaches that it's become, I feel we're it's been a long time doing it, but we're a very tiny team, as you now know, John, for the kind of work we do.
Yeah.
But
oh, yeah.
I feel and we've got the meeting with Sport England, and I am going to push them on. I don't know what funding's available, but we have an education tool now and an app that I'd like to almost get funded for young athletes to make sure they're not doing all the dangerous things we talk about, and that is still evident in the sport. But if you go past what I'm talking about, the senior squad, we've got 12 to 17-year-olds, and by God, John, they should be our focus. They're the people we want to make sure they're safe. Their mind is bottom line. There's safeguarding involved. There's all kinds of stuff, and that's their role. I take more out of that than I do being with a UFC athlete.
Really?
Yeah, I never really got. I mean, I work with what I've got. Paddy, Veronica, Jack Shaw, Molly McCann, Liam McCourt, now Luke Riley, Adam McCollum, Liam Gittins, probably George Staines, Matt and Dan Bonner. Shout out to Dan, he's fighting for the WBC Thai world title in a couple of weeks. But I have them all on, and it's all great. I never set out to do that. I set out to change education at the grassroots. I did my promotion, Shinobi, to give a better, or show what I thought would be better for grassroots, for showing ambulances on site, and as I say, medics on site for weigh-ins. And it's still my passion, as mad as it sounds. It's like, I love working with them guys, and I do cross the line of professional and friendship. I'm close to these people. I have genuine love for them, which doesn't help at times because I can't always watch them, John, when they're fighting, if I'm honest, especially if it's the females. Really? Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you live and breathe every minute with them, but I'm still more passionate about grassroots, real development, and seeing these kids ultimately be safe and learn the fundamentals and foundations to make them better athletes, and generally have somebody to reach out to, perhaps if it's second opinion maybe outside their team, or that their team can interact with. So we haven't managed that yet. I mean, it's a massive scale to try and affect everybody in the country, because as you said, John, you're going to deal with egos and people who know things better, and and they have their own people to work with. But that's what the English MMA was for me, and it's about trying to get it recognised. The Olympic thing, I know we talk about the Olympics, and I don't know if it end up in the Olympics. I don't know even if that's the journey that we should be talking about. It's too far away. The journey is doing it right now with the grassroots, if I'm honest.
We've got a lot of housekeeping to do before we get there.
A hell of a lot. And you know what? And I've got to say, I was thinking about it watching the something on BBC last night. We celebrate the Olympics with all the athletes being there and all the singers being there, and all I felt like doing was like, I feel like our youth squad should be there with their gold medals and silvers and stuff. That's what I felt. I'm like, that's the Olympics, of course, but I feel like we've got the Olympics. There's 900 kids competing from 40 countries, and like, I'd like to put them kids up on the pedestal and let the country recognise them as well, because we don't, because it's amateur sport and stuff. But you do it. I do it because I want to see these kids do well. But ultimately, for me, if we can stop one kid doing a bad weight cut and potentially doing something that risks their life, or on the other side of taking brain damage and injuries, at early stage, if we can just do something different or get across to them and stop that from happening, that would, I'd feel like we've achieved something. And that's ultimately the journey. What I started on and where I am today is like a modest, non-academic kind of coach has done all right, but I'd like to see the sport develop, because these kids are developing, but I don't think we're catching them up quick enough with the right education around safety and performance.
I want to highlight something that you were good enough to share with us when we got on our collective call with the other board members. There's still some pretty gnarly practices going on. You were talking about the World Youth Championships that just took place in Abu Dhabi only a couple of weeks ago. Can you don't have to obviously be specific about nations, etc., but can you give us an idea of some of the things that really worried you concerning, and I think it's worth noting, the probable age of the athletes that were demonstrating these sort of practices?
Yeah, so to give some background to it, I'd spoke to IMAF before on a number of occasions, but more about seniors and the size of the weight cuts going on. And that was not me doing kind of, which I did at this IMAF I'll go into, like I did at our qualifiers, John, where I had to scale at the cage to look at regain. So it gives us some...
I remember that.
I'm not doing that to be draconian. We're not doing it to name people. We're not doing it to beat people over the head, because that makes people run away. I want to do it to... We can make it confidential, but we can share information that we're aware of, and then try and do education. Make it educational, collaborative, normally gets better change than trying to beat people over the head with stuff. I spoke to IMAF before. They did have a weight-making task force, and I'm not being critical, but it was a very high academic team of people that, although Carl, my partner, was involved, but like only at the back end, and there wasn't much buy-in, and I was very critical of them, because I'm like, what are you doing? Because I'm watching this, because I go to the gym in the morning, my good lady wife would be with me and travel to competition, and we'd go to use the gym in the morning, we'd have to walk out because it was disgusting. Like same day weigh-ins, the sweat, the people in there that I'd seen there the night before, I mean, it was puddles, it was mopping up stuff going on. So like, it's quite obvious. So I spoke to them then. A year later, year and a half, I'm kind of thinking, I'm going to the youth championships now, and actually this is more important. And I'm going to give a shout out to Kenneth Brown, because he was supportive. And I said, I want to scale at the cage side of these kids so we can look at regain, because there's no better way to judge it really. Because for me, the kids, what they're weighing in should be generally where they're fighting.
Right.
It can be within 3 hours, John, 3 to 4 hours after weighing in, they're going to fight.
Yes.
So notable things in breakfast in the morning, I'm looking at these kids and they've got mounds and mounds and mounds of food and litres of water surrounding them, and that after weighing. So that's telling you that clearly they've been under-eaten and dehydrated to have that, to be doing that. I did cage one on day one. It didn't quite work well because a couple of things. I didn't have the right credentials. I was still carrying an England coach badge on, which so people were saying, what are you doing here? So they hadn't really set it up properly. I'm not being critical, but that's the reality. I got 10 athletes done though at cage side. At cage one, youth C, 37 kilo, 12-year-old category, I think, or 12 to 14-year-old category. And a number of them athletes had gained 10% in weight. From 37 weighing, we're now 40 kilos. Now, that shocked me, if I'm honest. I didn't think it'd be that excessive. Putting that to one side, and I've got to send the data over, I started, it's dead easy. Be around the hotel, we've got photographs and videos, but the children, right? So it's like, you're not going to do anything with them. There is a point, actually, that GDPR and anything children related, you can post if it crosses safeguarding standards. i.e. you could use it, which I wouldn't, but this is safeguarding. And I think everybody said to me, including Kenneth's son is involved with RDX, but they couldn't believe how many people, and I just want to set the tone for this. It was 45 degrees in Abu Dhabi. At any level, or the high-level professionals been used to maybe even doing an Ironman, you wouldn't send them out, anybody running in 45 degrees heat, right? These kids were running in sweatsuits in 45 degrees heat.
How old were they, remind us, Paul?
Well, there's 12 to 17 on weight bracket, but I can tell you of 2 children I went to engage with that were both 13 years of age that were crying. And they were crying through the distress of cutting weight. Their coach was laughing at them.
This is appalling. They
thought it was funny that the kids were like really struggling, and I've got the photograph of them kids actually sitting on the couch all lined up in sweatsuits. This was 5:30 p.m. the day before they're weighing in the morning, the next day, for the same day weigh-in. When you go outside the hotel, all around the streets, or in the hotel, or walking around the foyer with people in sweatsuits. Oh, sorry, not people, kids. 12 minors. Some of them really young. I spoke to a Bulgarian kid. I should mention the country, but I've not mentioned the name. But like, he'd lost 6 kilos.
Jesus.
So,
what sort of weight category?
57.
Jesus Christ.
So, the reality is, I mean, it wasn't everybody there. So, from parents I spoke to the rest of the athletes, and even some of our athletes, they're in the sport. They've seen their teammates, their senior teammates. Everybody's quite blown away about how accepted it seemed to be that these children were in sweatsuits constantly. Now, it pained me. It's deep worry. It's kind of like, you are waiting potentially for a death. I don't know what else to say really, but if you ever talk about culture, and I talk about all the sexy sports nutrition, Instagram, work with UFC, there's so many seminars and meetings and people, academics in their peer group sharing weight cutting studies, and it's all great. But what I'm saying to all these people is none of this language and none of this research and anything is making it down to grassroots level to make a difference. And maybe that's the language we use because they don't understand it. I've always been outspoken to say we need like a ladybird book for 8-year-olds for weight cutting. It needs to be pictures and big words, right, that people can understand. I've got to do the report to IMAF because I want to make a point that IMAF experience for athletes and parents is unbelievable. Like, incredible platform. If anybody's never seen it, please go onto the IMAF website and just pick some of the fights up and look at the promotion. And it was incredible. And when you see the difference, it's a life-changing, life memory experience for these kids. So I want to make sure I'm not being critical. I just want to help IMAF try and make a difference, if I'm honest, because I don't think it's that difficult. And with all things in life, if you're the safeguarding expert, his only job was to walk around the hotel and pull people over that are doing that, you'd stop it. Because if you tell people, we are going to monitor this, it is not acceptable, and you call them over and you call the coach and you say to the coach, if I see this again, there may be, sanctions imposed or something. I don't know, John, but ultimately for me, you've got to stop it by saying, it's easy to recognise, we will be there to stop it, because that'll make people think differently, number one. Number two is they do have a head coach committee. Why can't we get buy-in, signature, actually make it part? So everybody has to do safeguarding to be there. For me, safeguarding should have a section that's signed for that. As a coach, you won't do that to a child. For me, doing that to a child is the ultimate safeguarding, obviously. Of course, there's all the things about, obviously comes with safeguarding and making sure the kid is not showing signs of any external abuse and all the things they could, around children. But abuse is potentially putting a life-threatening situation in place, and that's what you're doing this to kids. So I am going to push hard and kind of go out to see if we can do something different in safeguarding to make people sign that they're not going to do this, but do it by getting coaches together and be educational and maybe share the risks that maybe they don't understand. And ask them why we think it's an acceptable culture to make kids cut weight, because it's just horrendous to watch. And if anybody can ever just picture that in their mind, kids crying with distress, cutting weight, please, just let that hit home and coaches or mentors or guardians or whatever you want to call them thinking that's acceptable. That's the situation we have in the sport. And for me, you know, going right to the top of the sport, that's fine. Risk and reward, get paid a lot of money or can work with people, but we can't let this happen with kids, surely. And we need IMAF to get on board because they can influence a lot more kids than anybody can if they've got 900 turning up and then they've got another big African one going on. But again, giving Gareth his due, he's aware of it and he does want to make a difference. I guess it's more to try and help them. How can you make a difference? I am going to reach out, probably via my own socials, John, but I'll say it here, that if anybody would like to work on a little task force with me, but give them some voluntary time to say, what could we work within development sport of MMA? Can we work with kids? Because if we get it right with kids, we won't, you know, we've got less to worry about adults because they'll be educated.
Yeah.
If there's anybody interested that fancies joining me on this little crusade, so to speak, I'd be up for that because I've never had anything that's hit me harder than from a safety perspective and what I saw there. Where you should be just coming back celebrating, which it was an incredible tournament. But you've got to see it to really let it hit home. But there's a lot of people who don't understand weight cutting as much or not as involved in the game doing that were shocked as well, you know. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a negative side, but let's treat it as a positive that we've got the experience now and we'll do everything we can to try and change it. And the one thing we will do is not allow that within English MMA, and we'll make sure that the communications are done appropriately, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you, Paul. Thank you for highlighting it as well, and hopefully, yes, the difference can be made. I hope it. I actually hope it is lack of education. I mean, I can't account for the laughing about it, but I do hope it's just naivety and ignorance, because there's no other reason. You can't justify it. So hopefully something can be done. I'm sure IMAF will support. I guess as the organisations get bigger, there's a few more layers, but we aim to get there. Now, I've taken a lot of your time. I would like to finish up with something a little bit more fun, if you're all right with that.
Yep.
Of course, you are the man in the room. You see things which we don't. And I think this is also an opportunity to sort of celebrate certain athletes. You spoke about earlier your time with Colin Byrne, and you got the your athlete of the week. So with that, of the athletes that you work with, if we can keep it to MMA, I think that would help us here on UFC Fight Pass. Who would you say is your most disciplined athlete?
Wow. I'm not going to upset somebody here, right?
I'm afraid that's part of the problem.
I would say most disciplined food and all year round strength and conditioning, Veronica Hardy. Fact.
There you go.
By some way. I've got to add this caveat to that though. In camp,
go for it.
Paddy's incredible. In camp.
Okay, a little asterisk there for Paddy. We like that. This is slightly different. Which sport has the best conditioned athletes in your experience?
Wow. MMA. I'm going to say MMA. Yeah. I'm going to leave it that answer. Yeah, well, I've got to say that, haven't I? Yeah, MMA.
Pound for pound, the strongest athlete you work with?
Oh, I've got to keep it to MMA.
Yes, please.
Oh, that's a real tough one, that, John. You've put me right under it there. Strongest or most, I mean, there's a different strength and power.
Okay. If you can give me both or one, whatever's easiest.
Luke Riley for power, John.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, if anyone hasn't watched Luke Riley's fights, he's had some absolute barn burners, but definitely a kid to watch. Isn't he on Contender Series this season, actually?
I'm not sure it's confirmed yet. I think it's still. I think we're still trying to sort out dating visa and that kind. But he's certainly right on the cusp, isn't he? Because his performances do that. So I think for the power athlete, and certainly from a conditioning perspective, he's incredible. I just shout for Adam Cullen from Cage Warriors, who's a very strong athlete. Matt Bonner, strong athlete. To be fair, for the female. relative strength again, Veronica, but that's just a side effect of consistency. She's incredibly strong, like incredibly strong.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, it's a hard one because like I've got all the crew there, and I'm thinking I'm going to single a few people out.
This happens to every coach. Yeah, I do this. I'm sure I've upset a few people, and some coaches have not been fond of me for asking these questions. Only a couple more here to stop the sweat. Pound for pound fittest?
I've got to say Luke.
Right.
I think I'd have to say Luke for fitness, absolute fitness. Yeah, he's a phenomenal runner. Hard work, like he brings it every time. I think fit. I mean, it's tight. Like we're talking about small margins here. Yeah, to be fair,
yeah.
Paddy's incredibly fit. Paddy's VO2 is elite.
Right.
But yeah, I'm going to pull him out because sometimes we watch him, and I have a coach who works with me, Marcus Unwin, who's a brilliant young coach. I think he'll be the best in the game. But we sometimes do watch Luke and think, wow, pretty incredible. But I mean, they're all good because they're consistent, John. But yeah, he's a standout, I think, for real conditioning and fitness. Yeah.
Okay. We'll relax on those now. What? I think you've covered a lot of these points, but I'll give you a chance to give it some like top line treatments. What are your hopes for the sport of mixed martial arts in terms of what you're within the roles that you play?
I think number one is that we can attract some funding into the sport. I think that would be my hope. That then we can deliver better education, or maybe performance centres, or things that we can help the sport developing. You know, it's like kind of like, because I work with a couple of GB judo athletes and stuff, and obviously once they get in the Olympic team, they get all kinds of resources, Sport England funding and stuff. But I'd like to see a pathway into that the sport can develop, because at the moment it's relying on just volunteers. And you know, if we can attract a small sponsor, then shout out to Dave and the UFC for their, you know, the assistance they give us as part of that shadow sanctioning thing, because that's a big part of being able to keep us alive. But yeah, I'd like to see some funding, a bit more interest from Sport England to assist the sport. I think would be an ultimate goal, just to stop all the things we've been talking about happening through getting some structure in education and classrooms and performance centres and stuff like that.
Yeah, great. And then lastly, how could someone follow in your footsteps of the kind of work that you're doing with the athletes?
I've always got to say, and much as I didn't go to university, if you've got the means, not everybody has got the means to go to university, and actually it doesn't suit I mean, I wouldn't say it ever suited me where they had the means, because I don't think my educational structure would ever fitted into a university background, if I'm honest. But if you have the means and financial resource and stuff, then perhaps university, you know, become an academic, maybe, and learn more. But however, I just want to make a point, that's not the be all and end all. You know, I'm an example of that. But if you can't do that, do the next best thing, like get qualified with some of the best online courses. You know, spend your time, be a student, have continuous professional development. There's a lot of good resources out there. Global Performance Nutrition Institute UK, that's something I'm ahead of. You can study your sports nutrition under the ISSN, the leading nutrition bodies in the world. And then just get fully qualified through your personal training into strength and conditioning coaching courses. It's a load of great resources, but number one for me will always be, remember that you need to coach. For all your education, and it doesn't matter where you go in the classroom, like, become a good communicator, let people trust you. And it doesn't suit everybody, but get on that floor and practice, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. But be aware that when you're in combat sport, you're going to have to put a lot of care into what you do. It's not a footballer comes in one day and goes and plays his football. You're going to deal with somebody that will have a lot going on in their mind, and potential, a lot of stress physiologically and from a psychological perspective. You're going to get injuries. You're going to have all kinds. Like, you can immerse yourself into this, but you've got to be a coach. You've got to understand that this sport brings, from the whole nature of being in the sport, and you're going to enjoy being punched, kicked, an elbow to the head, or choked unconscious, that, like, there comes a certain personality within that. They can be the best people you'll ever meet, but you're going to have to win some trust. You're going to have to put a lot of effort in. You can't be wishy-washy. You're going to have to give it all, but you could build a good business. don't be afraid to reach out, be collaborative, don't be negative, don't make your socials negative, talking about what others do badly, focus on yourself. Because it can be, like you said about head coaches, technical coaches being in competition, or it can be a negative environment with egos. It's terrible within S&C nutrition at times, and it shouldn't be. And I think if you want to stand out, give a bit back to people, don't always charge for it, give a bit of free time, show that you care about it, but learn how to coach people, be a people person, because if you can't be that with it as an MMA performance coach or whatever sort, then you're probably not going to survive.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Paul. Very much enjoyed this.
Thank you, John. That's my favourite interview of all time.